in 2 to 3 minutes. I will start by saying Percy does go back almost 300 years when the native Lenni Lenape, or Lenape Indians, or Delaware Indians as they were called, inhabited the area along the Perkiomen Creek, which is just down below our building here. And it was originally known as Pocassie. It was believed a Lenape name for where hickory nuts are cracked. Believe it or not, where hickory nuts are cracked.
Can't make that up.
You can't make that up. And they still use that term on some of our Percy literature and trash bags. Anyway.
I didn't know that. I'm learning already.
All right. Anyhow, later on in the early 1700s, the Europeans that were in and around Philadelphia began migrating to the outside areas around the city. And they followed somebody named William Penn. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that name before, some guy named William Penn. But anyway, he established what is called the Manor of Percy, which included much of Rock Hill and Hilltown townships and comprised over 11,000 acres. Well, William Penn's daughter eventually married a guy named Thomas Frame, and they became owners of 2,500 acres around Percy, much of the town which it is today. But the first real settler of Percy was named John Jacob Stout, and he was a Swiss potter who acquired some 800 acres in Percy Manor about the mid-1700s. Not much else happened in Percy for a while, but in between 1830 and 1860, a South Percy village grew up, which was known as Bridgetown. It really wasn't Percy, it was called Bridgetown. And there was a little creek at Bridgetown. Many of you people know where the South Perk Hotel is, one of Percy's finest establishments. Well, there's a bridge that went over from Percy to Sellersville, just below the Perk there. And that
right on 7th and West Market, which became Hendrick's store, or earlier or later, BC and Behringer's store still there. One of the, probably the last fire damaged it substantially, but did not destroy, so you still go shopping on that very building. Curiously enough, from my point of view, not surprising, there was nobody around. So Hager's store failed. He didn't disappear. 3 other fellows, for example, I can mention what to me are giants: Abraham Benner, Samuel Hendricks, Malone Myers. They all come, Joseph Moyer, make the 3, 4. They all come from businesses and farms in Bloomington, looking for a new opportunity, knowing what the train can do for them, and they all begin to build most primitive houses, such as, curiously enough, Samuel Hendricks, I'm confusing the names now, I apologize, and Abraham Benner ended up living for a while in the same house. Made up one first store, everything was so incredibly primitive. But you jump 10 years, now we're talking 1880, and these giants are doing everything, having families, building small buildings of all sorts, stores and lumberyards and so on. And appears Milton Bean, who is living in Lansdale, who, as Charlie mentioned, was born in Rock Hill Township. His father retired from farming, moved to Quakertown. Then Bean chose to leave the family in Quakertown, moved to Lansdale for the same reason, that the train would make everything so much easier for him. At age 30, with no formal education, declares himself to the world an architect, has immediately massive success everywhere. In 1900, a little too late, later, in 1900, to make life even easier, built his own car. And of course, bad as it was, he dared to go everywhere on his own car, from Norristown to Kutztown and beyond. If he broke down, he had it fixed, he kept on. Perkas is here, he's visiting his family in Quakertown, from Lansdale all the time on the trains. He obtains fantastic amounts of work in Quakertown and in Lansdale, Well, lo and behold, so of course,
I think
he started
Mr.
with,
Bean had a clean slate to start with, and that's very rare for architects today. The closest thing we could do or hope to do today would be to do a unified development and a mixed use of retail, commercial, institutional, and residential. But those opportunities are few and far between. I think the main difference would be that today we would be doing it for a developer, a single client, where Mr. Bean did it for hundreds of clients, many buildings for different clients, different uses. So it's a unique opportunity that he had, the beginning of our town and country.
So when you're designing for an individual rather than a developer, would that change the way you approach a building? I mean, I would imagine each owner has a preference in what they want.
I think the individuality of individual clients would come through in the design, where a development community would be appealing to the masses, so it has to be a generalized design, it has to be acceptable to more people. Where some of the unique things, the towers and those kinds of things that you'll see in the Bean homes that you're going to tour on Sunday would be specific to those individuals, so they're unique from that viewpoint.
Thank you, George. Now, we're looking at the Grimm, Bean, and Thatcher home, or building that was, well, it was a home when it was developed. Now it's a law office. George, you did an addition onto this building. What are some things that an architect needs to keep in mind when they're doing an addition to a historic building like this?
Yeah, this property was already occupied by a law firm, and they were looking to acquire space in the building next door to them, a separate structure. So they wanted to connect them. And as an architect with a leaning toward historic preservation, the first thing we do is to identify the significant historical features of a building and that should be protected or preserved, and give us clues to how we can add on to the building without offending those. The additions and the exterior alterations to these buildings are generally done under the guidelines prepared by the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, which are adopted by most communities that have historic architectural review boards. The standards include things like not destroying historic materials. The new building should be different from the original building. We shouldn't try to copy it and fool anybody.
One nugget at a time. Tell us a little bit about the experience of going into a building and experiencing some of that history and saving.
Howdy. Is this thing on?
It is. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hey, that guy at the end there's got a great radio voice. I can listen to him all day
I
long.
have a face for TV, or radio, I'm sorry. That's
It's the voice. But so I'm Jay. We have Jason Woodworking. Began years ago building furniture out of antique materials. Really happened by. I never set out to really save anything. I got to sum this up in 30 seconds. All right, listen. I was
I got an hour and a half to fill, Jay.
I was
You
a dog.
crazy, all
You're
right?
gonna let me go here?
I'll get the hook out.
You know, so I'm adopted into this Jewish family. You can't make that stuff up. Now, we come out of Philly, blue collar, you know, move into a development in Buckingham, and I don't get along with this family. So I dive into the woods. I find my first farmer's dump. You guys know what a farmer's dump is, man. And that's something special for a guy like me. I started finding stuff in there. It was the coolest stuff I ever seen in my life. You know, my dad never told me it was cool. I'm never. They washed my hands when I got home. Oh my God, your hands are dirty. I'm like, they'd throw the Coke bottles out that I found. I just got a love for things that were old. Like to me as a young kid, I was like, if this stuff could tell a story, the stories it would tell. And that just started a bug. I got a bug for it, and later on in life, kind of trying to figure out what it is I want to do. You know, do you think I could be in a cubicle? No. A padded one maybe. But So what happened is, you know, I started building furniture in a horse stall up in, what was it? Trumbowersville. An old fellow let me borrow his horse stall. And I started building furniture. We got a phone call. A guy was giving away free wood, you know, 20-inch wide pine planks he was pulling off a carriage building. Jay, do you want them? I burned a couple of them already. I was like, oh my, you know. So I went and got that. I started building furniture out of antique materials, the patina, you know, just the story of where it came from, like everything. It was just amazing to me, you know, and once you start building with such amazing materials, you know, the first, second, and third growth trees and the density, and it just, I don't know, I loved it. And then the guys I met along the way, like, it's like the home, what that guy lived in while he was building his home, you know, and the struggle, like the first people that came over here needed quick structures, and they went into the woods and they chopped it and carved it out of the woods, and that's really, I deal a lot with that, and there's something pretty special when you're finding, you know, a hand-hewn beam in a barn, and it's got you know, it's carved deep and it's carved thick, and you knew he wanted that to stay there for a long, long time. And I'm the guy who saved it, you know?
So Jay, what are the practical applications? What are people coming to use this for at your shop? What are some of the items they'd be coming to get, and how are they going to be using them now in current home?
I mean, what we really try to do is save the barn frames. You gotta understand, a lot of farmers, a barn is a hindrance to their operation. I'll describe an apple farm up in Bangor. You know, the apple farmer, the barn was just not doing what it needed. It was costing him money. He didn't want to see it go. The cool thing, it was already another transplant. It had already been salvaged from Easton. When Easton was being built up, they raised it, took it to Bangor, and then we went to Bangor and took that down peg by peg and sold it to a guy who's re-erected it in Jersey. So we try to save the history of the frame itself if we can. But sometimes it's too damaged. We'll bring it back to our store, we'll denail it. You know, and restaurants, you know, 10 years ago, everybody wanted a home that had white walls, white ceilings. I mean, I'm not about living in a hospital room, you know? And it feels like a lot of those people have come back to like, hey, how about we put something that looks like somebody lives in here, you know? And it's pretty amazing to take a few hand-hewn beams and throw it up in a room. It really adds a lot of life and a lot of like depth and texture to a room. So if you come down to the store like
now I want to talk a little about an amazing treasure right here in Percy, that's Percy Park. And Scott Bomboy is going to tell us about his experiences with the park and getting it on the National Historic Registry. Scott?
Thank you. How many people here actually know what Percy Park is? So it's about maybe 25% of the audience. Who here is actually married at Percy Park?
That was a setup.
It was a setup, I'll admit that. So 2 weeks ago today, Percy Park was named in the National Register of Historic Places. It's actually the second place in Percy. The third place was the former Moods Covered Bridge, which unfortunately burned down about 10 years ago, or 12 years ago. I was at a cocktail party in the park about 3 years ago, which wasn't quite legal in the park at the time because there was a prohibition on drinking alcohol. But it was in somebody's cottage, and they drank there for 100 years anyway. And somebody asked me if I would do some volunteer work for the park, and I said, sure, I would love to see the park on the National Register. You know, I didn't really have a clue what I was talking about when I said that, and just the amount of work that goes into it. I thought it would take a couple of weeks, we would hire a consultant, you know, it would happen really quickly. It took more than 2.5 years of work to actually get the park on the register. So the first thing I learned from that experience is you don't commit to anything at a cocktail party. And the second thing I really learned, which is much more important, is historic preservation is a good thing for communities if it's done correctly. For the residents of Percy Park, we learned a lot about the history of the property. We knew there was some oral history, there was history done in 1982. What we found out when we did the research is there was a point in 1890 when the camp meeting was really active On one camp meeting Sunday, they had 23,000 people in the park and 2,000 teams of horses. Because there was a fight in the church, they all came up on their buggies, their trains. They started the church service at 5:30 in the morning, it went to 10 o'clock at night. They had 8 to 9 services. And the park was a really big deal at that point. It was by far the biggest attraction. Percy was 10 years, that would be a year before Menlo Park. But for about a 20-year period, they would have at least 10,000 people on camp meeting Sunday once a year. The town only had a couple hundred people there. So what it did is it drew people into the town, brought economic development in, people saw the town. At the same time, Samuel Kramer, whose house you will see on the tour, if you do the tour on Sunday, he and another guy named, I think, Greer Sheets founded Lenape Park as an amusement park, and the town grew relatively quickly. I know from doing some research, because I'm currently studying historic preservation at Bucks County Community College, a third of the houses in Percy were built before 1940. So there's a lot of old built structure in the town. And what we learned through the process of the register is you need to have consensus to do anything like that. So what I did when I was the president, I talked to a lot of people. I probably talked to about 50 people over the course of the year, either in meetings or via email or on the phone, about why the register was a good thing. We put the register question on our annual ballot. 97% of the shareholders
It's
voted
still
in
our
favor.
official name, although we kind of dropped the Percy anniversary thing and just called it the Percy Historical Society. We have about 150 members, and we have monthly dinner programs at a church in Percy where we get about 75 people out. Hopefully it's more for the programs than the food, but the food helps draw people. And we hold monthly meetings from March to June, and then September through December. Some of our recent programs of the Society, October actually coming up, October 4th, we have a program on the rise and fall of Bethlehem Steel. September, we had the former owner of Leisure's 5 and 10, who gave his perspective on the Great Fire of '88 in Percy. In the spring, we did the historical highlights of Percy. Another program was the covered bridges of Bucks County. And one night we had the story of George Washington's slave. So our programs are varied, but we have a varied group and a varied interest. So we have 4 main projects with the Society, and a signboard over here I'd like you to take a look at afterwards. Of course, our main project is the Percy Carousel in Menlo Park. I told you about that carousel earlier. It's still Percy's most historic venue. We call it the crown jewel of Percy. But it's been on this site, a carousel has been on this site since 1895, when it was originally transported here from Allentown. And apparently in those days, they moved around carousels by horse and wagon, that's all they had. So they went from town to town. And Percy folks liked it so much that eventually they built a cover on the carousel and walls around it eventually. So that carousel has been with us. And for over 50 years, it was under the private ownership of Menlo Park before the borough of Percy purchased it in 1955.
Potential tenants for us. It was a property known as a brownfield site, which was a contaminated site from prior uses, had been purchased by the Bucks County Redevelopment Authority and the borough of Percy to have an application submitted and fulfilled by the federal government to clean up the site and to make it resaleable. So we entered into an agreement of sale subject to the cleanup to renovate the building, to salvage it, renovate the building for our offices and some potential other space, rental space. We talked to Penridge School District because this was prior to their building their new facilities out at on 5th Street as a potential headquarters for their administration. We also talked to First Savings Bank at the time, which is now Penn Community Bank, about their insurance division. And so we were lining up some potential users for the building, and we thought everything was a smooth sailing project until we realized from a neighbor's viewpoint there were some flooding issues. The flooding issues were off-site generated. They were not related to any environmental issues on site, and they would not have been exacerbated by the development of the site. But there was some potential litigation there that we decided that we didn't want to be involved with, and we decided that we were going to renegotiate our deal and look elsewhere for our space. And our lender at the time to purchase the property would have been First Savings Bank. And they became fairly familiar with the project, the property, and decided that rather than build a new building out of town, that they might consider using that building for their headquarters. And I think that's probably a good place to give it back to John and let him talk about their involvement in the project.
We did a lot of research back in those days, and we had looked at many, many different options, some from building actually right where we were to some open sites which were outside of Percy. One was a corner out in East Rock Hill at 5th and 313 right across from J. I mean, we had exhausted many, many different opportunities, and when we heard about this opportunity at first, we weren't sure we wanted to get involved. And I was naive, okay? Let me tell you that I now know people in as many agencies as I thought existed. DEP, EPA, OCC, FDIC, which I knew before, but the state banking agency, the Department of History and Museums, and then I didn't even talk about the county redevelopment and what I think it's redevelopment commission. I've forgotten the name of that one. And I didn't even mention Percy Borough, who was involved and connected with the county in the ownership of that brownfield site. And of course, all the test wells and everything else. I mean, by the time I was done, after I had said yes, I mean, I had to reconvince board members and so forth that this was the right thing to do. At the end of the day, I think it was the right thing to do. It was an experience that probably taught me a lot of things that I never would have had the opportunity to learn. And I can say to you that what I learned is that the brownfield site, the concern over, what do they call that? TCE. Yeah, that was the big, everybody wanted to be protected from TCE. I talked to so many people from EPA and DEP and residents and so forth. And I just want to share with you one story because at the end of the day, this was to me the right
This
thing.
barn, all right, and, well, no, an Amish guy tells me about a barn 5 years ago. So I go meet this Amish guy, he takes me to this property, there's this little old lady answers the door, and Amish don't mean to be rude, but this is how he came across. How much do you want, how much do you want for the barn? Like, and I'm going, what? Like, and she just closed the door on him, no say. So we leave, and I don't know how, but like a couple years later, I get a number, my wife sends me on the road to look at a barn, and now I meet an elderly woman, but not, but anyway, I followed this lady up this thing, and I'm like, this looks real familiar. And then I see the little white cottage, and I'm like, did your mother used to live in this house? And she said, my mother's in an old folks home now. And I was like, I met your mother. I was with an Amish person, and he was real. He didn't mean to be rude, but he was rude. Because this is the thing, when there's a barn that's built by your great grandfather, the first thing you say out of your mouth is not, do you want to sell that barn? Like, you gotta understand, if I ask somebody, first of all, I don't ask if I see the barns being used, but if I see neglect, like the roof's been blown off, then I'll ask. But anyway, so what happens is, so now I'm here with the daughter, and I'm looking at this barn, and then she mentions that her brother's gonna be showing up So then the brother drives up the thing, you can't make this up. Drives up on his tractor, the dog's on his lap, you know, and then he gets there, and like I said, they're probably late 60s, 70s, and then like she's like, well,
In the borough
he's like, oh.
is that there is a deep love and affection for this community. And I think the love and affection is what allows a large corporate bank to renovate and put their headquarters here. It's what is driving people to restore a lot of these old historic homes here. And one of the things we call Percy America's hometown. We have America's oldest tree lighting ceremony, older than New York City, and last year was recognized by Congress, and we have a certificate in Borough Hall declaring that. And then this year, Scott and the members at Percy Park gave us a great honor by putting this charming little community on the National Historic Registry. But one of the things about any community is about the quality of life in a community, and sort of by honoring our past, it helps us build our future. And so some of the things you've never seen before. So I hope you enjoy this tour, and I want to thank you for coming to Percy, and thank all of you panelists. I appreciate all of you.
Thank you very much.